Welcome to the second podcast this week, covering Acts chapter 5. And today we're going to do Acts 5:12 through 16, so a little bit shorter version. So at the beginning of chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira were judged by God for trying to get street credit for selling excess property they had, but then they kept some of it back for themselves and lied to Peter about how much they wanted to look more righteous than they were. Their heart really wasn't as generous and as family unified as they were trying to make it appear. And the Holy Spirit basically caused them to die. And so a great fear comes upon the church. And this is where we find ourselves in verses 12 through 16. This is kind of a summary paragraph in between parts of the story. So the next part, and we'll start it tomorrow, is when, again, the leadership of Jerusalem are deeply troubled by these things that are happening. And so this paragraph for today is in between the Ananias and Sapphira event and then the Sadducees and others really trying at least to clamp down on the disciples. Okay, verse 12, let's launch right in. And through the hands of the apostles were coming to be signs and wonders, many signs and wonders were coming about through the hands of the apostles. This is not just a one-time thing. The power of the Spirit is flowing through them in a regular kind of a frequent kind of way among the people. These signs and wonders were coming to be, many signs and wonders among the people. And they were all together. Again, notice how often these first chapters of Acts emphasize the togetherness of the early church, the unity of the early church. That's the way it's supposed to be. And we're getting a picture of what the ideal church should look like in terms of that togetherness and that unity and that family, the family of God. I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. They were a family. And they were together all in the Stoa of Solomon. The Stoa of Solomon was on the outer part of the temple enclosure. So it was on the outer part of the court of the Gentiles. So the temple was kind of set off by boundaries, holiness boundaries. The outer part, the outermost part inside the temple precincts was the court of the Gentiles. Gentiles could go in there. And then there was, beyond that, you entered through the court, through the gate into the court of the women, where Israelite Jewish women were allowed. And then you went through Nicanor gate, which may have been the beautiful gate, into the court of the men of Israel, and then only priests were allowed beyond there. And of course, ordinary priests were allowed in the courtyard when it was their assignment, and they were allowed in the first room, the holy place, the holies, when it was their week, as we saw Zechariah in Luke chapter 1 and 2. And then only the high priest, of course, could go in the innermost sanctum, the most holy place. So there were holiness zones, as it were, within the temple. The Stoa of Solomon, a stoa is a colonnade, shady place. It gets hot, so you like that shade. On the outer part of the court of the Gentiles, on the east side of the temple, so facing kind of the Mount of Olives. Okay, this seems to be where the early Christians regularly met to pray when they went to the temple. Verse 13. And no one of the rest was daring to join them. Now that's interesting. There's something about that, if I'm understanding it correctly, that seems like it shouldn't have been the case. When we are right with God, then others should be able to join us. But so maybe this speaks more to the way others felt toward the disciples than the way the disciples felt about others. That they could have joined them, but that they didn't dare to because of this fear. There's something holy, but when there's something, not that these men were intrinsically holy, but there's something about the holy that you take your shoes off when you're in a holy ground. And sacred space is something that probably in the American church we've lost quite a bit of a sense of sacredness. We don't quite understand that. I remember growing up, you weren't allowed to run in the church. Probably aren't allowed to do that anymore. But you know, I was scolded at least once for playing in the church because the idea was it was a holy space. In fact, the church I grew up in had a kind of a hallway that separated off the sanctuary from the Sunday school rooms and the room that we used to have, you know, kind of pitch-in dinners and so forth. And I think it was done that way in part to set apart the holiness of the sanctuary. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should go back to those days necessarily, but there was some there was something instructive about that, to realize that where God is, that is a special place. You know, holiness is godness in a way, or belonging to godness. I know if I were around, you know, one of these power stations where you can almost hear the electricity buzzing in the transformers, you know, you're going to be careful what you touch in there, because that thing is supercharged. And of course, Uzzah touched the ark and got fried. And so these are the things that come to my mind when I read that no one was daring to join them, because they saw that there was something God-like, divine, something of the divine in these men. Let's continue. But the people were magnifying them. Verse 14, and more were being added, that is, of the ones believing in the Lord, a multitude both of men and of women. I'm glad that Acts mentions that women are involved here too. And of course, we saw this in Acts chapter 2, right? Your sons and daughters will prophesy. And so, and we're not talking even about prophecy here. We're just talking about the fact that women believed just like men believed. It was a multitude of people. By the way, on the day of Pentecost, it was about 3,000. And then at the beginning of chapter 4, it mentions that there are about 5,000 people now. And now we've stopped counting. It's just a lot of people. More were added, believing on the Lord, both men, and a multitude both of men and of women. By the way, this is very Pauline, isn't it? Believing in the Lord. The idea of having faith that Jesus is Lord, confessing Jesus as Lord, giving your allegiance to Jesus as Lord. Okay, let's continue with verses 15 and 16. With the result that even in the streets to bear, it says the weak, but this means the sick, to bear the sick and to place upon beds and pallets, in order that Peter coming along, even if the shadow might overshadow someone of them. This is faith. This reminds us of Jesus, doesn't it? And I don't think it's a coincidence. The book of Acts wants us to see that the disciples are doing the same things that Jesus did. Now, of course, I don't remember any of the Gospels talking about people trying to get into the shadow of Jesus. If the shadow touches me, I'll be healed. So that's even greater. Didn't Jesus say, you'll do even greater things than these? But I do think that Acts wants us to see that the Holy Spirit, just as Jesus showed us while he was on earth what the power of the Holy Spirit can do through a fully human being, so also we are now seeing that the apostles are doing the same things that Jesus did through the power of the Holy Spirit. Interesting that even if the shadow touched them, that's faith, isn't it? Verse 16, and also the multitude of the surrounding cities of Jerusalem were coming together. So people were coming. Word is spreading out. Again, reminds me of Jesus. How people came from the villages and the sick. They brought the sick. Bringing the sick and the ones who are afflicted by evil spirits, by spirits unclean, by unclean spirits. Didn't Jesus cast out demons? Well, look here. The disciples are going to cast out demons as well, who all were healed. What a great thing. Now, Of course, some today would say that if you have enough faith, you'll automatically be healed. That is not my sense of the New Testament teaching. And of course, there is that verse in, I think it's 2 Timothy, where Paul says that he left Trophimus sick at Miletus. So God, it is not God's will to heal everyone. But what tremendous signs were done here in the earliest church. Well, that's our verses for today, Acts 5, verses 12 through 16. Now, if you've hung around for the video part, let me go ahead and do a little bit of Greek. So going back here, let's look for the Greek bits here. Egineto is imperfect. It is the present stem of ginomai with an augment. So through the hands of the apostles, signs and wonders were coming to be. And it's a continuous flavor to it. They were happening, many of them among the people. And there were together all in the Stoa of Solomon. No one of them was daring. Okay, here's another imperfect. It looks a little different here. You might look, well, what's with this ending? Well, talmao is a contract verb. And the third person singular for talmao in the imperfect looks a little different. But it is the present stem with an augment. It's imperfect. No one was daring, that continuous flavor. Kalasthai, infinitive. But the people were magnifying them. So another imperfect, megaluno, with an augment. Present stem with an augment, it's imperfect. More were being added. So this is prostithemi, to put to add. It's present stem because of the tit. The augment there suggests it's imperfect. Believing, myont is an active participle, present active participle there. Multitudes, actually that's a plural. This is a weird neuter plural. I won't go into it, but these are the dreaded neuter plural with an eta. Okay, so that result clause, to infinitive, to put, present infinitive, genitive absolute here, in order that Peter coming. So there's a genitive absolute, a noun in the genitive, participle of the genitive. Hina introduced a purpose clause, so we're expecting a subjunctive, and there it is, aorist subjunctive with a sigma, in order that might overshadow to someone of them. This is the indefinite pronoun. If you know a little Greek, you might say, well, how can that be the indefinite pronoun? Because it has an accent on it. Well, the accent's on the wrong syllable. The accent would be on the first syllable, and it would be an acute if it were an interrogative pronoun. And so this is the indefinite pronoun. Another imperfect, lots of imperfects in the passage today. They were coming together. Even the multitude of the perix, there's a word, or the around, perimeter, the around, the multitude of the cities around of Jerusalem. Bringing, myont is an active participle, present active participle, and those being afflicted. I think this is deponent, but an actual passive translation works there. They are being afflicted by spirits evil, that's agency. Who, hoitinus, is a kind of relative clause, conditional relative clause. They were being healed, another imperfect. So there's a little bit of Greek for those of you who are hanging in for the YouTube video. See you tomorrow, Lord willing.